I once kidnapped a prince. I took him in the middle of the night, wrapped in a blanket, with nothing but a small bag of diamonds and the clothes on my back, and I ran. I ran across borders and through darkness and through 40 years of a life lived in the long shadow of a secret that could have gotten us both killed. And this morning, for the first time in 4 decades, a king knocked on my door. Not to arrest me, to thank me. Welcome back to Secret Confessions, True Stories. If you love stories that remind you that love is the most powerful force on this earth, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. There are more stories like this one, and you do not want to miss them. Now let me tell you why a king was standing on my porch this morning, and why I have been waiting 40 years for this day and dreading it in equal measure. London, 40 years ago. I was 23 years old, which is old enough to have ambitions and young enough to believe they will arrange themselves according to your plans. I had come from a small town in the west of England with a nursing qualification and a letter of recommendation from a family I had worked for. And through a series of circumstances that still feel unlikely when I trace them back, I had been interviewed, vetted, approved, and installed as a junior member of the nursery staff for a royal family whose country I will not name, whose story is not mine alone to tell. The royal household was not British. They were a family in exile, temporarily stationed in London while political negotiations concluded in their home country. Or so the story was told to staff. What the political situation actually was, I understood only in the vaguest terms at 23. There was a king who was old and unwell. There were 2 sons, the eldest, whom I knew as the crown prince, who was 10 years old and whom I rarely saw, living as he did in a different part of the household with his own tutors and household staff. And there was the baby, Leo. He came into my care when he was 3 months old. I want to try to describe what it is to take a baby of 3 months into your arms as a professional responsibility, and find, within days, that the professional boundary has dissolved entirely, and what remains is something so much older and more fundamental than employment. He was a round-faced, dark-eyed, endlessly curious baby who treated every new face with the same generous enthusiasm, who learned very quickly that I was the person who came when he cried and who made the sounds that settled him, and who attached himself to me with the complete and uncomplicated trust of a very young child who has decided you are safe. I was not his mother. I knew I was not his mother, and I loved him with everything I had. The household ran on routine, the particular, elaborate routine of a royal establishment in temporary quarters, where ceremony and protocol are maintained as a form of psychological continuity, as if the formality of daily structure can hold the larger uncertainties at bay. I knew my place in that routine, and I kept it precisely. I was not privy to political conversations. I did not mix with the senior household staff. I had my domain, which was the nursery on the 3rd floor, with its barred windows and thick carpet, and the rocking chair in the corner that I had claimed from the first week, and Leo, and the small, complete world of a baby's days. I had been there for 8 months when the night happened. It began with sound. This is how I have always remembered it, not as something I saw first, but as something I heard, because the nursery windows faced an inner courtyard, and the first indicators were acoustic. Sirens, but the wrong kind. Too many and too close, and with that particular quality of emergency that is different from the routine sirens of a city night. And then, beneath the sirens, something worse. Voices raised in a way that is not argument, but command. And under that, sounds that I recognized without wanting to recognize them. I was out of the rocking chair before I had consciously decided to move. Leo was asleep in his crib. I went to the door and opened it a precise inch and looked into the corridor. And what I saw told me in a single moment that everything had changed. There were men in the corridor who were not household staff. They were dressed in a way that suggested authority of some kind, and they were moving with the focused directness of people who know where they are going and what they will do when they get there. One of them had a document or a list of some kind. They were checking room numbers. I closed the door. I stood for a moment with my back against it, and I understood something that a 23-year-old girl from the west of England had no preparation for understanding, which was that the people in the corridor were not there for a routine inspection, and that the nursery was on the list, and that a baby in a crib was an obstacle to something rather than a person to be protected. What I felt in that moment was fear, real fear, the kind that is physical, that you feel in the extremities and in the chest and in the sudden heightened clarity of all your senses. And underneath the fear, something else. Something that came from the 8 months of the rocking chair and the settling sounds and the dark eyes that had decided I was safe. Something that did not feel like a decision at all, but like a condition, a simple, irreducible fact of what I was capable of and what I was not. I was not capable of leaving him. I moved very quickly. There is a quality of action that arrives in genuine crisis that is different from ordinary physical activity. A compression of thought and movement into something almost instinctual, the body implementing decisions before the mind has fully articulated them. I wrapped Leo in the blanket from his crib. He stirred and I made the sound, the specific soft sound that he knew, and he settled. I went to the small safe in the nursery closet, the one whose combination I knew because I had been responsible for the petty cash for nursery supplies. The safe contained, among other things, a small drawstring bag of diamonds that I had known were there in the way you know things in a household, peripherally, without having been told directly. I do not know why I took them. I will tell you that I have thought about that decision many times in 40 years. And the most honest thing I can say is that some instinct told me that what I was about to do would require resources that a 23-year-old nanny's salary could not provide. I took the bag. I put it in the pocket of my cardigan. I went to the window. The nursery was on the 3rd floor. What I am about to tell you is not heroism. Heroism is a thing that is chosen. What I did was not chosen in any meaningful sense. It was the only available option in the only available direction, executed by someone who was too frightened to be afraid of it. There was a ledge and a drain pipe and a garden below, and I went down with Leo against my chest in a position I had no right to be able to manage, and which I managed anyway. And when my feet touched the ground, I walked, and then I ran, and then I kept running. The weeks that followed are not something I can describe in a single passage, because they were not a single experience, but a series of them. Each one its own particular exercise in fear and improvisation, and the specific problem solving of someone who has no plan and cannot afford to make a mistake. I crossed from England with a passport that was not fully legitimate. The diamonds, it turned out, were worth enough to make certain things possible, including the help of a man who asked no questions and who I have never seen since. I moved through Europe in the way of someone who is learning as they go, who is carrying a baby and a secret and nothing else of substance. I arrived in the United States 9 weeks after the night I climbed down a drain pipe. I had a new name, which I had chosen from a novel I was reading on the crossing, and I had a story, which I had constructed carefully, and which was simple enough to be believed and detailed enough to withstand casual inquiry. I was a widow. My husband had died. I had a son. His name was Leo. We were starting over. I settled in a small city in the Midwest, which I chose because it was the kind of place where people do not ask too many questions about where you come from, because many people in that city had come from somewhere else and were also starting over. I found work. I found an apartment. I enrolled Leo, when the time came, in the local school, and I watched him become American with the complete, unconscious efficiency of very young children who absorb the culture around them without resistance. I want to tell you about the fear because I think it is important to understand what 40 years of a specific fear actually feels like from the inside. It is not the acute fear of the night of the coup, which was large and total and present. It is something quieter and more constant, a background condition, like a frequency you can't unhear, present in every environment and every decision. Every police car that passed on the street outside made my heart do something that is not quite a stop, but is the physiological equivalent of a flinch. Every knock on the door that was unexpected sent a particular quality of cold through my chest before I answered it. Every news story about the country, which I followed from a careful distance through newspapers and eventually through the internet, was read with the specific attention of someone looking for information about their own danger. There were several years, in the early period, when I believed they were actively looking. A story appeared in an international newspaper that I found in a library. Brief, factual, describing the coup and its aftermath, mentioning the royal family. The baby prince, it said, was believed to have died in the chaos of the coup night. There was no evidence of his survival. The country had moved on. This information was both the best thing I had ever read and the most complicated. It meant they were not looking for Leo specifically because they believed he was dead. It did not mean the danger had passed entirely, because the people who had executed the coup did not know that the baby had survived. But the people who had survived the coup, the royal family in exile, the former household members, did not know either. I was, in a very specific sense, alone with the secret from all directions. I told Leo, when he was old enough to ask, that his father had been a good man who had died in a war in a country far away. I told him this with as much truth as I could embed in the fiction. There had been violence, there had been a country, there had been chaos that had taken lives. What I omitted was the nature of the lives it had taken, and the nature of the life that had been saved. He accepted this with the equanimity of a child who has no contrasting information, for whom the story he is told is the shape of the world. He grew up kind. This is the thing I want to say most clearly about Leo, because it matters more to me than any of the other things I could say. He grew up with a kindness that I did not teach him, and that did not come from me. It seemed to be simply constitutive of him, the way certain qualities are not formed by circumstance, but arrive already present. He was the child who noticed the other child sitting alone at lunch. He was the teenager who stayed after the school event to help stack the chairs. He was the young man who chose medicine because he said that the specific combination of being useful and being present with people when they were most vulnerable seemed to him the best use of a life. I went to his medical school graduation and sat in the audience and felt something that I have difficulty naming precisely. Something that was pride and grief and relief and a specific form of love all at the same time. Pride because of who he had become. Grief for everything he did not know about himself. Relief that he was safe, that the secret had held, that we had made it this far. And love. The same love that had sent me down a drainpipe 20-something years before, unchanged in quality if not in form, still the defining condition of everything I had done and everything I would do. He became a surgeon. He specialized in cardiac surgery, which he told me once had something to do with the particular satisfaction of working on the organ that people think of when they think of the most essential things: love, life, the irreducible center of what a person is. He was good at it. He was excellent at it, eventually, in the way that combines technical mastery with the human quality of making patients feel that they are a person rather than a problem. I watched this from the particular distance of a mother who cannot say she is a mother, which is its own kind of love, complete and not quite nameable. I did not marry. I want to be honest about this as a choice rather than a circumstance. There were people over the years who might have been something more than they were, but I carried a secret that could not be shared with a partner, and I was not willing to share my life fully with someone I was deceiving fully. The secret was the shape of my life in a very literal sense. It determined what I could say and what I could not say, what I could allow and what I had to prevent. And a marriage is not a structure that accommodates those conditions with integrity. I chose the secret over the possibility of company, and I am at peace with that choice, mostly, which is the most honest thing I can say about a decision made over a long period in difficult circumstances. Leo had an apartment in the same city. He came for dinner on Sunday evenings when his schedule permitted, which was not every Sunday, but enough of them that it was a rhythm, a structure, something I organized my weeks around. He was 40 years old, which meant I was 63, and he was the most important person in my life and did not know the full dimensions of why. The Sunday it happened was an ordinary Sunday in October. I had made the soup he liked, the one with the dark bread on the side, and I was in the kitchen when I heard it, the sound of multiple vehicles on our quiet residential street, moving with a kind of coordinated purpose that residential streets do not produce. I went to the window and saw the black SUVs, and I felt the fear arrive, the old fear, but different this time, older, and somehow more tired than afraid. The fear of someone who has been waiting for a thing for so long that when it finally comes, there is almost a quality of recognition. I went to the front door. I stood on the porch in the October light with the soup still on the stove, and I waited. The SUVs stopped. Men in dark clothing got out, moving with the professional economy of people trained for exactly this. And then one more door opened, and a man got out who was not dressed in dark clothing, but in something that communicated a different kind of authority. Quieter, more formal, the authority of someone who does not need to perform it. He was 50 years old. He had a quality about his face that stopped my breath, because it was familiar in a way that bypassed recognition and went directly to something deeper, something that my body knew before my mind caught up. He had Richard's forehead. He had the shape of the jaw that I had last seen on a 10-year-old boy in a corridor in London 40 years before. He walked toward the porch. His face was doing something complicated, control and grief and something else, something I can only describe as the expression of someone who has been looking for something for a very long time and has just found it. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He was a king. He was the king. He had been the crown prince when I last saw him, and he was the king now, which meant the country had been recovered, which meant the coup had been reversed, or outlasted, or overcome, which meant all of this was possible in a way it might not have been at any point in the previous 40 years. He said my name, my real name, the name I had left behind in London, which I had not heard spoken aloud in 40 years. I said, "I know why you're here. I want you to know that I would do it again." He was quiet for a moment, and then he did something that I had not prepared for, had not considered in any of the 1,000 ways I had imagined this encounter over the decades. He came up the porch steps and he knelt. A king, kneeling in my small garden in the October light, with his head bowed. He said, "I have been looking for you for 30 years. We thought you died with him. When we discovered you had not, that he might not have, I have been looking since. I came to thank you. I came because you saved the bloodline. You saved my brother. You saved everything. I sat down on the porch step because my legs made a decision independent of my intentions, and I said, he's a surgeon. He saves people's hearts. He's going to be very confused when he gets here for dinner." The conversation that followed lasted most of the afternoon, and I will not give you all of it because parts of it belong to a king and a woman on a porch, and not to any larger audience. What I will tell you is that the country had stabilized over decades, that the coup government had eventually failed, and a constitutional restoration had occurred, that Leo's existence had been discovered through the kind of documentary research that has become possible in an era when information leaves traces, and that the king had insisted on coming personally rather than sending representatives, because there are some gratitudes that cannot be delegated. Leo arrived at 5 o'clock. He pulled up in his car and saw the SUVs and stood in the street for a moment with his keys in his hand. And then he looked at the porch, at the man standing beside me, and I watched the incomprehension move across his face, because the face beside me was, in certain angles, in certain qualities of expression, a face that resembled his own. I told him everything. I sat with him on that porch while the light changed and the soup went cold, and I told him everything, from the night in the nursery to the drain pipe, to the 40 years of the background fear, and the Sundays with the dark bread and the soup, and the love that had been the frame of his entire life, even when he did not know its full dimensions. I told him about his father, the real story, the man who had been a prince and who had died in the chaos of the coup night, along with his mother. And I watched Leo receive this information with the particular quality of stillness that surgeons develop, the ability to hold very large things without being immediately unmade by them. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. And then he said, "You never told me. All those years you never told me." I said, "I was afraid they would find you. I was afraid every day for 40 years. He said, "Every day?" I said, "Every day." He stood up and he held me in the way that adult children hold the people who raised them, the specific embrace of someone who has just understood something about the structure of their life that they could not see before. And he held on for a long time. Leo did not take the throne. He visited the country. He met the king, his brother by blood, and the meeting was, by what Leo has told me since, the strangest and most complete experience of his life. The feeling of a story he had never known he was living, finally resolving into something with a shape. He was offered everything: titles, position, a role in the restoration of a family that had believed for 40 years that the youngest son was dead. He declined the throne with the particular grace of someone who has already found what he is for. He is a cardiac surgeon. He saves people's hearts. He told his brother that he had a life, and it was the right life, and he did not want a different one, only the knowledge of where he came from and the freedom to come and go. The king gave me the highest honor of the kingdom. There is a medal, which I have put in the drawer beside my reading glasses because I am not the kind of person who has display cases, and there is a title, which I have not used because after 63 years with a false name, the title feels like more than I know what to do with. What matters to me is the other thing, the thing that is not an honor in any formal sense, but which is the thing I actually needed, which is the knowledge that it was worth it. That the 40 years of the background fear and the loneliness and the undisclosed love were not a private tragedy, but the shape of something that mattered, that a person survived because of them, that a country's story continued because of them, that on a Sunday in October, a king knelt in my garden. I have been thinking, since that afternoon, about the nature of love that cannot announce itself, about the love that lives in the shadows, that does not have a name or a title or a public form, that operates as an invisible structure holding something up that would otherwise fall. There is a particular kind of courage required to love something completely, that you cannot protect in any way except the way you have chosen, which is to be present, to be steady, to show up on Sunday evenings with the soup and the dark bread, to be the constant that holds the variable of a person's life together while they become who they are going to be. I did not save a prince. I raised a good man. The prince was incidental. The man was the work. And the work, as it turns out, was worth everything it cost. Thank you for spending this time with me today. If this story reached something in you, leave a comment below. I read every one of them, and they mean more than you know. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and I will see you in the next confession.